I think we're live.
It says
Hello.
setting up meeting, but
It's always
okay,
it
going
looks delayed to
redirecting to
us, but
YouTube. Here we are. We're there.
Can you
yeah, I
guys
think
hear
we are
me?
officially live. Hello, world. We are Chaos, or New World Chaos. That's the name of the show. I'm Nemo. I'm here with my co-host Jeff, aka Satyr Punk, and we're just having a good old time. And today we got a special guest. His name is Dylan. He's a pretty good
Hello?
friend of mine. Me and Dylan have known each other for a pretty long time. Um, and we have a lot in common. I think all three of us share a lot of criticisms of social justice. Um, Dylan's a nurse; he's pretty passionate about that, and it takes a lot of empowerment. You definitely can't play victim if you're going to have a tough job. And we don't know really exactly what we're talking about today, but I think it's just going to be personal and fun and casual, and maybe see how we relate to social justice and bob and weave around the cultural insanity of the day. um, Dylan, do you want to tell people maybe a little bit about yourself and maybe some of your favorite things, something that inspires you, and then maybe how you relate to social justice?
Sure. I'm Dylan. I'm a nurse. I'm really passionate about it. I'm also really passionate about fitness, staying in good shape, and being healthy. I have two leopard geckos. They are adorable. Love them dearly. Uh, as Jack has stated, we've known each other for quite a while, and I'm kind of new to podcasts, so this is actually my first one I've ever been on. So it's nice to see. When it comes to social justice, I just noticed that on the outside, it could be somewhat destructive, especially when we focus on little thin white lines or just small things that can really hurt people rather than like seeing the deeper part of them. It can be harmful, especially when we focus on that small stuff rather than looking at the whole person. Basically, I'm hoping to find the complexity of people and hoping to have compassion and understanding toward them rather than just jumping to one square or another and claiming that they're evil.
Yeah. When you say focusing on small things, do you mean things like microaggressions where people are being petty?
Yeah, pretty much like finding the smallest thing and like finding that as like the trigger point or like the very end. It's very like inhuman on how these things are. They don't see like the whole person, rather just focus on like one thing that was said wrong. It feels like walking on eggshells. This isn't what humans are supposed to be. We're supposed to be building each other up and not like tearing each other down by even the smallest part of incorrectness.
Yeah. Dylan, as I've known you, you're a pretty heartfelt person. You can be really sentimental and caring. And I know that you've also, like, you've talked about being concerned, being a male nurse, and you've gone through kind of questioning or being stressed out about that and like being falsely accused of things.
Uh, yes, there were definitely some of that, especially with the pathologization. I don't even know how to say that. Like pathologizing of like even what the male is. I mean, a lot of people will say that like men have a tendency to be more aggressive. Well, could be true. At the same time, it is important that we keep ourselves open to those kind of things and understanding that, of course, each person is responsible for their own actions. And of course, like I'm only 5'4", I'm not going to hurt anybody, and I have no intention of doing such.
Yeah, well, I'm 5'4" and I've still been falsely accused twice, but it's probably not the most important part of what you said, anyways. I don't know. According to social justice, as it appears so far, short men are still oppressive, even though gravity is like not on our side. I'm
Yes,
I'm height challenged.
indeed, vertically.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Like you've always come off as very not like a caricature, but like as far as guys go, you come off as pretty masculine to me.
Yes, I mean that's why I call myself a bear.
Yeah, you're a gay man and a male nurse. I'm sure there's a punchline somewhere in there.
Oh
Um,
yes, the
and
stereotypes.
yeah, and has it seems like despite a lot of the social problems with social justice being in LGBT worlds, You seem to bob and weave pretty well from what you tell me.
Yeah, because I'm more so focused on people and focused on like listening to them and just joining people together rather than just like get hooked on like small with thin white lines of like what's considered to be correct or incorrect. I mean, we're just human. Like we're supposed to be messy in nature. I don't really see that one thing is correct or not, and I'm just pretty overall accepting of people.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've usually I it's so funny. You're reminding me of the way that me and you have related to politics, just in general, and not just being divisive or divided based on social justice, but politics more broadly. And even though I have a past with very much disliking the government, as you know, it's like an inside joke with anyone who knows me that I think the government tends to be authoritarian, but over the years, I've just become more and more non-political, and the people I mesh with the best tend to be non-political. They're not caught up in that and just constantly fighting over it, which seems to be how you are. And maybe, do you think you build bridges better because you're not tied to a strong political position?
I think so. I mean, I don't really like attach myself to like any belief in particular. Like I'm just pretty open and accepting of people and just offer people the best. People doing whatever they wish as long as they're not hurting other people. I don't really give a shit. It's like do what you need to.
Yeah, sounds relatively libertarian.
Yeah.
I don't know. Libertarian is a difficult label to use sometimes. People seem to have very different ideas of what that means.
Oh yes.
Jeff, were you able to share us on social media so people know we're
Yeah,
live?
we did. We're live. So if anybody wants to comment in the comment section or ask questions, and then we may take guests at the end, depending on time.
Yep. Yeah, if we have viewers, we're trying to do audience participation. Any comments or questions? Yeah, Jeff, you grew up in Louisiana, and you've talked about it a little bit, the kind of LGBT experience there that you would find other people that were gay or in the LGBT world, and then that would be an ally in the positive sense, not like social justice allies. But now that you've been in Seattle, that strategy doesn't work anymore. Am I right about that?
um, yeah, I grew up gay. It was Trump country, and it was rural Louisiana, so smaller towns. So you took your allies where you found them. Like anybody that was supportive, gay, straight, black, white, male, female, I was happy to have them on my side. And I didn't. There wasn't a purity test they had to pass. They didn't have to prove their allyship. There weren't all these hoops they had to jump through to be an ally. I was just grateful for any kind of support. And when I watch the social justice people or the modern form of allyship, I'm so curious about what they're trying to accomplish, or do they want allies or not? Do like if someone's willing to be an ally, let them be an ally. Like don't put them through under the microscope and through the ringer to make, I don't know, it seems like they direct some of the social justice or some of the I relate to what Dylan said about walking on the eggshells, and I kind of get the impression from a lot of social justice people that they're almost looking for conflict, or they're trying to find, like, even when things are peaceful, they seem to find little threads to pull or tug at. They can't just interact and kind of take people as they are on their own terms. They problematize things that I wonder what purpose it serves to problematize things like that when you're trying to build allies or form relationships or connect with other people. Maybe that's not their motive. I don't know. But I noticed that a lot too, that walking on eggshells feeling. And I definitely can't be in those environments for too long. I can't really function well in them. The etiquette is just way too much for me to navigate. And then the male thing I relate to a lot. I get called aggressive all the time, and I don't know what they're going off of because I'm usually just sitting in a chair talking. Maybe I'm moving my hands. Maybe my emotions are intense, but I get called aggressive male. I was the last job I was fired from. I was called into a meeting, and one of the things she stressed in the meeting was how potentially violent I was, which I don't know where she was getting that from. She's never seen me be violent. She played out this scenario where if she left me alone with a coworker, I would attack them or assault them or vandalize the office. And I don't know where she was pulling it from. I was a victim of violence. I had my nose broken. I was hit 6 or 7 times in the nose, and I never thought to throw a punch one time. My friend had to jump between us and break up the fight. I wouldn't know how to be violent even if I wanted to, or even if I tried. But I get painted with this aggressive male brush. I get painted as violent. I get people act like I'm a threat of violence, and I don't know what they're basing any of that on, other than maybe a stereotype about males that it's being perpetuated currently. I get the toxic masculinity thing. I get all of that. Growing up as a gay person in Trump country, it was homophobia that I had to battle. I was the fag. I was the gay, the queer. Now I'm the aggressive, toxic, masculine white guy. So both parts of my identity, I had to defend one part growing up, and now I have to defend the white male part of me, which I never thought, like, that's usually where the homophobia came from growing up. And now I find I have to defend the same people against accusations of toxic masculinity and aggression. And it didn't feel fair being gay, having to fight against homophobia. It didn't seem just. And it doesn't seem just as a male to have to fight against androphobia in today's society. So I've had it from all sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, caught between a rock and a hard place. I don't know, Dylan, do you ever relate to any of those experiences? The weirdness of on one hand being gay and then on the other hand being seen as a toxic man or whatever?
Um, in some areas, yes, but like it's not as common considering like where I work. I mean, social justice isn't as like apparent in the place that I work at. We just rather just have mutual respect for each other and take the time to listen. But I can kind of see where you're coming from. Like you want to overcome all these hurdles about people attacking you for who you are, and now it's the people who are supposed to support you are now attacking you for who you are. We can't change the fact that we're men.
Yeah, it's weird. You know what this reminds me of? If we kind of zoom out a little bit and look at history, I don't know how far we need to zoom out, maybe from the 1970s to about now, so about 50 years, we'll say. Kind of the middle of the, um, what do they call it back then? The gay revolution, LGBT movement in the
Stonewall.
70s. The what?
I guess like the gay rights movement.
Yeah.
That's
So
what I know
that
it as.
point, that time period up to about now, there's this weird overlap that seems like some really bad luck for us dudes because in times past it was uh, gay men that were pathologized, especially say in the 1950s, those old PSAs that were painting them as pedophiles and all that. And now we look maybe by the 90s that it sort of flipped, or at least it was starting to, and it seemed like instead male heterosexuality was being criticized. And you can't always tell what someone's orientation is just by talking to them or looking at them. Like Dylan, as far as all the stereotypes or categories, patterns, whatever go, Dylan does not really come off as gay at all, at least to me, and I think to a lot of people,
Mhm.
until maybe you talk to him for a long enough period of time and figure things out or whatever it might be. And I can see a little bit of that with Jeff, maybe. It's like there's this stereotype that gay men are more feminine or they got like a certain voice, and that's how you can tell, but sometimes you just can't tell. So it's like this weird bad luck where male sexuality is just being pathologized.
Mhm.
And it's like now it's just like turning into everything. All male sexuality is pathologized. Being a man is pathologized. It's like we're all kind of in the same boat now. And I don't know. I mean, at the job I had where I had my situation, it all started because I asked a woman on a date, and I knew that was a pretty dumb risk. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. It's not worth it for the most part. And one of the factors of that story that doesn't come up as much is the fact that I'm considered transgender, female to male.
Mhm.
And that's kind of a curveball. And it's a little crazy because only a couple of my very closest friends there knew that fact about me. It doesn't occur to me to bring that up most of the time. It's not natural that that topic arises. And at least that's my experience. I think maybe Dylan's a little bit similar to me that way. You can clarify if you like, but so the fact of the matter though is the woman I asked on a date probably would have been more likely to actually say yes to a date. She knew I was transgender than just thinking of me as the totally evil cis white straight man. So it's a very weird thing. I never would have imagined that having that condition would actually be a positive thing in the dating market. Like I'm a hardcore realist here. I'm very blunt with myself. Being short and being transgender do not help you as a man in the dating market. Okay, am I gonna pretend it's all sunshine and roses? No, this is not easy to deal with, and that's just a fact of life, and I'm totally at peace with that. So why would it be a positive thing in this environment? And that's how screwy this stuff gets with this like victimhood caste system where straight white men are like at the bottom. It's very weird to me.
Yeah, it is strange.
I don't
I
know, Dylan.
mean,
I mean, you pass pretty well, just like I do. So I don't know if maybe that has an influence in how people react to you as well. But you probably don't experience the social justice stuff as much as you're at your job because your job is very practical and it's demanding. It's a nursing job. It's medical stuff. You can't social justice your way out of medical care. It'd be a disaster.
yeah, I mean, it's overall pretty well rounded. I mean, the thing about like pathologizing men and all that stuff, like the thing is that like with anybody, people should just take responsibility for their action. It's like I hate it when people assume it's like, oh, men are automatically going to attack me. It's like no, like men know how to be like most men know how to be responsible and to like fare themselves out. There are some bad ones out there, but there are some good ones. Quite a few of them who actually know like how to handle themselves. Like we aren't feral creatures that can't control their urges. Some of them try to make that excuse to do that, but no. Like we are human beings just like you are, and we know how to control ourselves. We are not
Yeah.
these creatures that are here to attack you and rip your guts out. Like we know how to control our urges. We are human beings just like you are.
Yeah. I know you told me about a time where you went on a date with somebody, some guy or whatever, and he said that he was banned from his LGBT club because he was white. Is that a true thing that happened? Am I accurate about that?
It's racist.
Um, I don't remember that. Are you talking to me or?
Yeah, yeah. Dylan, you told me one time you went on a date with a guy you met on Grinder or something like that, right? And he said he was banned from his LGBT club because he's white? That doesn't sound
I
familiar? Didn't you say he was like had red hair or something? Or you told him you were transgender and he was afraid that you wouldn't like him or something like that? I don't know.
Oh
No?
yeah, like that was a long time ago. Like
It was like last year, but okay.
yeah, I mean like we offered to go on a date with each other. Well, we didn't really go out though because like we just had different relationship expectations, but it was it was just kind of messy. Like a lot of people were just like had they'll use like different labels and we're just kind of going after him for just stupid like thin white lines as I call them, like a demographic of what you're born as. I mean, in which case, like the most I would do in that case is just be open to listening to people and their different experiences. Like diversity, diversity is a really interesting thing. Like as I say, everybody experiences the world, but how we experience it varies from person to person, and that's how. And that's the time when we embrace like the differences that are between us and listen from them and learn about what is important to a person rather than attack people for being different on either side of that experience rather than taking like rather than taking in and learning about people, staying curious rather than attacking a person for not knowing what that's like. I guess like the best thing to do is just to continue to have universal compassion for each other, even if it's difficult.
You've said that phrase a couple of times. Could you describe universal compassion, like what that means to you?
It kind of goes on the Buddhist principle, like all living beings will experience like some type of pain, and oftentimes like to handle that pain, we go to different areas or to different groups that we can relate to, because sometimes that's where they find kindness. Sometimes it's the best place from where they find kindness. Like even the most extreme people, a part of hate groups, like they will go to a certain group of people because that's where they can find kindness because everybody else hates them. Not to condone like the hate groups or anything, but for those people to get out of those hate groups, what happens is that another person will show them kindness, show them that there's a better way to experience that, and it gets them out of that because they know that they can find more compassion and kindness in a better place than there.
Yeah.
Just understanding that like we find places that are familiar and things that we can relate to, even with all of our experiences. That's how we do it. Compassion can be like the hardest thing to do for people because it's so much easier to turn our back on somebody, backstab them, or have nothing to associate with them rather than just listen to them. But behind their words, there is pain. As difficult as it might be, we have to understand. We have to try to understand that pain. We might not agree with what they have to say or agree with their motives, but we do have to keep in mind that they are in somewhat of a pain.
Mhm.
What they come to is a result of that.
Yeah.
It
That's
takes a
really
lot.
powerful, man.
Yeah.
I think it's hard for people to be motivated and care about that type of perspective. I find that a lot of people don't see the value of relationships. And if they were to see the value of relationships to some extent, then they might actually care about putting that type of investment in, like deep listening,
Hmm.
which is something I'm trying to practice and get better at. And honestly, of all the people I've met, Dylan, you care about people a lot more than the average person I've met. And I don't know what your secret recipe is, man, but you're ridiculously passionate. I mean, you're in a job that requires you to be really caring about other people, and instead of seeing it as a chore, you seem to see it as a gift. I mean, if you've met somebody that was really more apathetic or just struggling with finding motivation to care for other people, what would you do for them? Do you have any ideas?
I just tried to imagine what it would be like to be in that situation, how they would feel trapped, and how they'd feel stuck in one place. I mean, this person was completely paralyzed and had very little control over what they could do and what they couldn't do. They wanted things in a specific order. It was one of the few places that they can have control over their life. And I tried to imagine like what they would go through. Instead of like stomping my feet around saying like, oh, this person is grumpy because they don't like me. I just think of it, it's like, well, this person's stuck in one place and he doesn't like being stuck in one place. Like, can I blame him? Can I blame them at all? So I just try to see what he's going through and offer compassion for that. And even then, like I was bedbound in the hospital for one day, and I love to run, I love to move, and he goes through that kind of stuff every day. Except he can't even move his legs or his arms. I don't know how to be able to handle that. I would just imagine that he would feel trapped in one area. And even when I was bedbound, I felt frustrated. So I tried my best to like see what it'd be like, have compassion for that. And every time he was frustrated, I wouldn't take it personally, but rather try to have kindness toward him. He was not acting out in spite of me. He wasn't doing that just to get on my nerves. It was just his way of releasing whatever frustration was within him.
Hmm. It's not personal. Yeah, I find the more I look at the conflicts and messy things that have happened in my life and the sabotages, that the way that people are reacting says so much more about themselves and what their experience is rather than anything to do with me. And especially because I'm often pretty similar in how I act and respond in a lot of environments and to a lot of different people. I suppose I've got some range, but I tend to mostly be the same person. And arguably, I like, for as an example, I'm pretty sure I interact very similarly with Dylan, both you and with Jeff. And so I find other people, their reactions tend to say a lot more about them than me. And sometimes it's just as simple as you have incompatible personalities or incompatible values. And it's really making me realize more in depth how much the average person around me that I've met in our culture these days, however you want to define our culture, America, the Midwest, wherever, the Northwest for Jeff, but it really seems like the average person is too attached to trying to get other people to be like them. Like they don't know how to coexist with people who are legitimately different from them. And I mean, maybe small differences, but it's like their bottom line for their basic requirements of what other people need to be like is kind of high standards. And it's a little strange because, as far as my lifetime goes, I was born in a multicultural, multi religious, multiracial, multi everything, multi ice cream flavors culture. I've not known anything else.
It's like the
So,
Chex Mix of the world.
and it's like, why would people be so bothered by others being different from them if we're in such a multicultural life? And to some degree I find it's that if a person feels deprived of empathy, they become intolerant. They need to be empathized with so their experience is witnessed and heard and they're listened to. But I mean, if you ever had, like, sometimes a therapist will use, or psychology minded people will use the phrase, you're like a porcupine that wants to be hugged. And sometimes that's how I see social justicey people. Some of them, not like all the time, but some of the people I've met, it's like they want empathy and they're so deprived of it, but they deprive themselves of their own needs so much, and they're like a walking set of contradictions to the point that they just start to hate everybody and everything, and so they're just going to push people away because they're miserable. And it's like now you're just stuck in a paradox. You're a porcupine that wants to be hugged. It's a bit
Or
tragic.
just, yeah, maybe it could just trickle down to like the universal fear of the unknown. It's like you would rather just be in a place of familiarity if like where you're within your same fears or within the same place, like kind of what people with agoraphobia have. They just want to be around the same.
Wow.
Be around the
Nemo, you've
same.
talked before about the trait of openness, and I think people with more openness, I appreciate differences. I enjoy differences. I get stimulated by I wouldn't want to be around people that were all the same or just like me. But I think some people maybe that have less openness get threatened by differences, or it's too much of a cognitive load to constantly process difference, and they're more comfortable with things that are predictable that they can relate to. So there's probably a psychology behind tolerance for differences or not. I've never understood it myself. I've seen there was nobody around like me, so I was forced to grow up in a culture where I was the difference, and the people around me were different from me, and I had to accommodate myself to that. And I'm not threatened by difference. I embrace it and enjoy it, but I do know that many other people have the opposite response to the same stimulus, which is difference.
Yeah. Something else related to that conundrum, or that what you described there, you being the one that's different and then other people seeming to not be able to tolerate that. I have basically the same experience throughout my life. I've always been the one that's adapting to people around me to build, like, bridge those gaps between us. So that's, in a way, my normal is this multitude of normals. There's different people and they have different perception, they have different desires, different daily experiences, and I'm always coexisting with that. There's not one normal, there's multiple normals. And something else I've been thinking about with people that seem to be really intolerant to that, there's a lack of flexibility and they're just really not interested in people that are too different from them. To some extent, I think it has to do with utopianism and an attachment to morality. I think most people I've encountered, when they consider their moral values, they want to build morality like it's a container. So I mean, I'm actually not too far off from that. It's like morality is the bottom line, and we don't cross that line. Nobody in our little community should murder anyone that's immoral. Things like that. And if a person's obsessed with morality and they're suffering because of the terrible things that happen in the world, then it's this real tug of war between it's like man versus society or even man versus himself. And if a person gets really hyper focused on that, it's like they're constantly walking around thinking about the fact that bad things are happening in the world, and they're just too rigid and controlling because they know that as one person they ultimately have almost no power to change that. It's like an external locus of control thing. They want to build a moral container and then contain everyone within it. But pragmatically speaking, I that's a almost impossible thing to do. It's almost just going to make you miserable. And if you're concerned about morality, like how I'm evolving as a person, I'm primarily focused on living by my own values. And that's first, and that's the majority of it. And then after that, I'm just going to see if I naturally can connect with people that have compatible values. It doesn't even have to be the same. And if we can build a community where we have that moral container and it's functional and we're empowered, that seems way better. But then just let that be our little container and forget about trying to change the whole world and society to be under the same morality. That just seems utopian and it's just going to make you miserable.
Because of lack of different experiences isn't going to teach us anything. Like, we won't learn if we're all the same. There's nothing to get at it. There's nothing to be enriched by.
Yeah. Amen.
And I don't find it that hard to not kill people or to not lie or cheat or to treat people kindly. So I don't think I think about morality. Like people that come from a more moralistic framework, I think they also have a different psychology or maybe different wiring than I do, because that's not something that I find that difficult, that I need to focus on it constantly every hour of the day and make sure everyone around me is also doing the same thing. I can pretty much, I feel like I have the freedom to take people for who they are and enjoy them for what they are on their own terms, because I'm not obsessed with my own morality. I'm kind of resolved with all of that.
Yeah. Well, I remember, Jeff, some of the way that you've described your childhood experiences, it sounded like you had a lot of childhood freedom, and maybe that affected it. I would have a hunch that that affects it. To some extent, a lot of the people I know that are on some kind of a moral or ideological crusade, it seems like they're really trying to undo the unjust and wrong things that happened in their childhoods, or they're trying to get revenge on their own parents, or they're just lost in that. And so they don't really have a foundation internally that's strong and confident. They just seem it seems like they're trying to right wrongs in the world because they haven't made their peace with whatever happened to them.
I'd be interested in having someone on the podcast from the social justice side to kind of explore their thinking and their psychology and their motivation.
Yeah.
Because I really like what you say might make sense, but I don't know. Like I can't tap into their mindset and their way of thinking. It's so strange to me.
Yeah. Uh, well, I relate to social justice proponents in like one particular way that's not as common. And that's the tendency to be antagonized by society that pushes you towards being on the fringe or potentially even becoming a radical revolutionary. There's definitely some big differences. I've never like fetishized or romanticized historical activist movements. I don't really like the label of activist. It seems a little goofy and sensational to me if I called myself an activist. But to some extent, I can empathize with the desire to address some major widespread epidemic or problem in society, and that being a purposeful thing. And also that tied to being feeling like you're antagonized by society, because I used to be very critical of government, and over the years I've just moved on from that. I'm changing as a person, and I think the biggest change is the fact that I'm building my own niche instead of trying to either find a place to fit into society, which doesn't work, is dysfunctional for me, or trying to alter some part of society to fit me. Neither of those worked. Building my own niche that is able to coexist with society seems to work the best. And a lot of people that are into social justicey stuff, or say more radical Antifa, Black Bloc kind of people, they're fantasizing about revolution, and I think it's misplaced creativity and misplaced autonomy. They're probably really desiring to build something that they can say is theirs based on their own values they relate to. And right now, a lot of people are just stuck. They haven't built their own niche or found something that works for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
I mean, it is a lot easier to just act out rather than just to stop and listen. I mean, like I heard it from somebody. I think it was like Pemmy Schroeder or somebody like that. That the most radical thing you can do is be compassionate, because compassion is like one of the least easy choices you can ever do in life, or the least to get these things you could practice in life. Because everybody else is telling you to do one thing or another, but compassion, that shit takes a lot of strength to do. That's the hardest thing. And to try to
Yeah.
see what the world is like through somebody else's eyes, even though it's radically different from yours, or even if it's completely against what your morals are. You just stop in the moment, realize everything is relative, and ultimately depends on how that person has went through the world. Just listening to them, understanding what they see is what has happened to them. Not agreeing with them, but rather saying what they go through is legitimate, and trying to see that. That's what compassion is, and still having a tender place for them.
Humanizing them.
Yes.
I'm curious about you clarifying a bit here, because compassion seems to be your favorite word this week, and I'm all for it. I mean, man, you got a big heart. You're one of my closest friends. I really appreciate you, man.
Yeah.
Good feels for everybody. But I'm curious about something. So, in my experience with social justice proponents, supporters, compassion as a concept, as a word, is pretty popular in those circles. And I have a hunch that the way they're using compassion and the way they perceive it is pretty different from you. Um, do you know, like, how would you, if you were talking with a social justice supporter, is there any way you would differentiate how you view compassion from, say, social justice, or does my question even make any sense?
Kind of. I mean, again, everything is relative, and like even the word compassion can mean great things from one person to the next. So,
Yeah.
like their version could ultimately mean like letting somebody else's voice be heard, or like listening to like one other person's experiences, which like we do have that in common. But they seem to take it into some sort of ideology and run with it, like saying like this is the correct way. Like their take on the world takes priority over everybody else's, rather than like keeping into account everybody else's, and seeing what that has to teach them.
Yeah.
Only may say like prioritizing what they seek to fit within their certain agenda, rather than just being open to what is around you. Because if you try to force the process of like trying to understand people, or like trying to exercise compassion, it's not really going to work. Like it just seems like you just have an agenda at that point. You're just trying to get a certain thing done. Like you're trying to filter out the experiences of those who are similar to yours, in which case like it just becomes a very narrow scope experience of what you had to go through, much like them, or one that you speak in particular to validate this or validate whatever somebody's trying to peddle out, rather than just being open to like what is around you and seeing if what you were thinking actually adds up, or what you are trying to see is something that's actually realistic within a certain area and time. Because
Mm.
the world is unpredictable. You can't really force it to happen in one way or another. Ultimately, you just got to be open to what comes. It's like that's the beauty of the unknown. and that's what it can teach you. It's just
Yeah.
about like accepting it rather than trying to make it a certain way. You just go with it and learn from it. What the unexpected and where it could take you. Where the unexpected takes you and what you can learn from it instead, rather than forcing it to go in a certain way. Because we can learn from like certain people, we can seek out like certain experiences that can teach us that way, but we also must open ourselves up to unexpected things, or unexpected people, unexpected experiences.
What I'm hearing that you add to the context here is not just compassion in isolated or total absolute compassion, regardless of anything else, but that you're adding in uh, an openness to the unknown. And so you're letting go of control and not trying to change reality. And it seems like you're very consciously aware of that. And a lot of social justice proponents I meet are can't stand the idea of letting go of their attempts to control and change reality, to the point that they almost seem to care more about creating a false reality that's believable rather than actually changing anything in the world itself. But
Yes. Another thing I do want to add is like it's a lot more easier to show love or compassion to those who you expect to see or those who you expect to relate with or within a certain area. The difficult part, however, is where you don't expect it to anyone, to any stranger. Like compassion to any stranger, even those who oppose you who are different to you. That is probably the most difficult thing you can do because it is so much easier to pin somebody else as an enemy or pin somebody else as an ally rather than just leave it to ambiguousness.
yeah, I found related to that recently something I've been thinking about. In my experience with people that really amplify their own victimhood, poor me, that type of thing, it's almost impossible to empathize with any real uh, harms that have come to them or trauma or terrible experiences they've had that's real because, oh, geez, my camera just went out. I'm going to replace the battery, but I'm finishing this
Okay.
point. Uh, okay, so it's really hard to empathize with people that are playing victim and exaggerating it because they combine their real negative experiences with their the fake ones or they exaggerate it. So and they're playing victim so much that if I were to empathize and show compassion, I almost feel like I'm getting swindled or I'm enabling their sort of addiction to victimhood. It's so entangled that I really feel the need to set hard boundaries and say, no, I'm not going to enable this. And if you are ready to be more honest and have some good boundaries, then maybe I could have a better time empathizing with you. But right now, it's a total mess. And I really had to, and also those people tended to lash out at me. So it was almost even more impossible to empathize with them. It's
Mhm.
like, you're just guaranteeing that, if you're a porcupine, I can't really give you a hug. And so it's incompatible. So it's almost like a person that wants to be a victim bad enough, if they don't have a perpetrator somewhere, they'll just become their own perpetrator. And it's like watching someone punch themselves in the face and say, "Oh, I'm in so much pain." I'm like, "Can you stop punching yourself in the face first, and then maybe I'll show you some empathy?" It's really difficult. It's a disempowering situation for both of us.
That's
I
where the
keep
sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
That's the difficult part of compassion. I mean, even if like some experiences might be true, some of them might be true. I still find that I do want to listen to them to see if like there's any truth to what they say. As ridiculous as an experience might be from anybody's perspective, still to listen to them because what might be in that ocean of what they tell you, there might be some tidbits of hints of who they are, and thus to listen to them. And even as difficult as it is to continue to have that compassion, like I said, compassion is not an easy thing. And to listen to somebody is like one of the most difficult things to do. Like, not to say that like you weren't negatively affected by some of these people. I'm saying to have that continuous compassion toward them is difficult, especially for people who just notice it as more blatantly as some of us do. So even as painful as it sounds, sometimes I just listen to them. Like I can judge it to see like if it's legit or not, but even then, I still do listen in to see if there's any like tidbits of truth in there. I mean, this could apply to anybody as well, and
Mm.
like I said, it isn't easy to do.
Well, in that case, emphasizing like truth or openness and curiosity, that's not just compassion to me. That's also being willing to take an observational perspective where you're not constantly trying to analyze or judge or tell a story, which are not necessarily bad things, but it's really good and useful to be able to observe things as they are and
Absolutely.
let go of a story or judgment regularly. That, I try to observe things because most people are multi-layered, fairly complex, and a lot of times they have contradictions within them, and it's hard to see both of those at the same time.
Yeah, like that's the approach that I take is like observational and with curiosity. And it
Yeah.
is pretty fascinating to see like what you can discover about a person. You just gotta keep observing and just putting ourselves on the bench and just being open and curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, that openness again. I, people fascinate me. Like I just can't stop being curious about them, even if I wanted to. And my sense of compassion is founded on the sense of the shared humanity. Like we're all the same species. We're on this planet together. That's where my compassion comes from. So I find it rather easy to be compassionate to other people since I see us all sharing a similar situation or common fate. But when you were talking about the victim, listening to people and the victim mentality, and I keep coming back to that triangle, and I can only think that people that are constantly in victim mode and voicing their victimhood, they're looking for a rescuer. I don't think they're looking for support or help or answers I think they're looking to be rescued or taken care of. And that temptation, I can see it being very attractive, but I don't think it's very self-empowering. I don't think it enhances self-determination. Kind of that ladder you were talking about. I think it comes from the lower rung of that ladder.
Yes. This reminds me of an example in my own life. I'm going to speak very generally here to disguise the identity of the person, but there was a person I encountered in a social justice environment, and um, we ended up having a conflict or more incompatible, which is pretty much the norm with me because people can tell that I just don't mesh well with social justice. So this happens all the time. So it's the inevitable conflict arises, and this person was having a really hard time in a way that seemed genuine. Like it was just uncomfortable socially to coexist. And so they started to put that on me more as my responsibility, because in this case, I'm the one in the oppressor groups, blah, blah, blah. And so I have to be responsible for what they feel and then make it better. But part of the problem that became this paradox and this just feedback loop that spiraled down further and further is the more they put that on me, the worse they felt about themselves rather than just taking responsibility and saying, I feel bad about this. They were acting in a way that they felt embarrassed about. And the more they wanted me to help them, the more they were not proud of how they were as a person. And so if I were to feed into that naively, if I was like I say more naive or just lovey-dovey person that doesn't have a concept of boundaries, then maybe I just say, "Oh, I didn't even realize. Of course you're dealing with that. It's a very hard time." And that would be what I call completely boundless compassion with no context and no refrain or balance. And but really what they needed, if anything, was to have hard boundaries set and say, and for me to say, no, you can be responsible here. And as soon as you are and you embrace that, you'll feel better because I know that you're a capable person and you're far more responsible, capable, and you have the capacity for wisdom. I've seen you take on big responsibilities in the group we were in. I've seen you take on big challenges and deal with hard circumstances. you'll only feel better about yourself if you start to take on those responsibilities. And actually, fundamentally, what it is to live up to your true potential. And just that one example, I generalized as much as I could. And fortunately, I think it's enough of an archetype where, like, I think that applies in a lot of cases that people tend to feel worse about themselves if they lean into victimhood because now they're just not proud of who they are and how they're acting.
Yeah.
That's what you reminded me of when you were saying that victimhood triangle and the victim's looking for a rescuer.
I mean, like I said, I have a hard time with the psychology of it. I don't really understand it. But to me, it would be, I would feel better knowing how to change my own oil or repair my own car or take, instead of having to go to a mechanic every time and have someone do it for me. It feels good to be empowered to do that kind of stuff. It's not something I think I would fight or resist unless people are just lazy or see it as a responsibility or an obligation that they don't want to take on and they'd rather have someone else do it. Beyond that, I don't really know why somebody would choose to stay in victimhood. Maybe childhood reasons, or maybe as a baby, when they cried, they had somebody come and took care of them. Like maybe, I don't, like I said, I don't know the psychology behind it, but I have a hard time understanding it from my perspective when I try to figure out why somebody would want to constantly stay in that mode and fight and resist any kind of self-empowerment.
Uh, Good old-fashioned
That's,
human suffering. What were you going to
Oh,
say,
maybe
Dylan?
it's masochism. I don't know.
maybe it's because like they want to create a hero in their own story, or I don't know, maybe be like the damsel in distress or something like that. But again, like I try to find like nuggets of truth into what a person says, if how they speak, and then just listen to them and kind of gauge out how open a person is to like listening to you, because one of the best ways you can trust with somebody is just to listen to them without judgment and to see like where they're coming from and just gradually build that. And if you just like offer up little things together, and I don't know, it just depends ultimately on the person and how open they are. Just using
Yeah.
that compassion but in a strategic way.
Yeah. Yeah. Dylan, I got you into Pema Chodron recently. This is kind of what, like that type of question, why would a person want to stay in victimhood? Or the broader question of that for me is like, why would a person perpetuate their own misery, essentially? So it's not always victimhood. It could be something else. It could be an addiction or whatever it might be. But um, Dylan, you've been listening to the audiobook of When Things Fall Apart.
Yeah.
Um,
I
is there
mean,
anything that comes to mind that's inspiring there?
this victimhood might be like what their suffering might look like, so they might feel like what they're going through is valid and what they're going through is like heard,
Hmm.
rather than understanding that all humans are suffering and what we go through is unique from one person to the next, but all of us suffer. I think it's just a way to like put a picture frame around a certain being of suffering to make it look like it's more standard, or to make it look like it's more like this. They try to simplify it to look more like something like this, but there's really no solution to it, rather than just looking at all the small things and seeing how they add up together. I mean, people like the world around them like are always dynamic, they're changing, and just the experience can't really be simplified into what is considered to be this or that, good or bad, or anything just so polarized. It's somewhere all in between. It's
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to really explain it, but somebody doesn't have to necessarily put themselves into like some sort of picture or caricature or a certain area suffering to have their suffering be known as valid. This could be because of a lack of like being understood, a lack of like being listened to, a lack of just being seen as human, or a lack of their suffering being acknowledged or even be heard or seen. So it could just be what they are doing is like a lack of being heard.
Yeah.
This is
Back
just
to
like a
the
cry
empathy
out.
piece.
Yeah, maybe perhaps like a cry out for saying like this is what I'm going through, and like this is how I see it, rather than just like grouping in people with the same amount of pain and just trying to find a way around it, or trying to find a way to just stew in it rather than to find a way out or a solution. Because if they break that certain caricature, if they break that certain picture of what their suffering is supposed to look like, they can relate less and less to these people, and they would fragment. Because even then, in a place like that where suffering is just over caricaturized, then it's just like there's only one way out or a certain way out, and one
Yeah.
way out might be less valid than the next, or there might be a certain way to do it correctly. It just becomes a big mess of like always being in this perpetual cycle of this caricature of what's considered to be valid suffering. And even
Mm.
then, this valid suffering collectively could be seen as like a break in the moment of history. I mean, it's one thing to have something that people can relate to, and when it comes to suffering, like during Stonewall, people were struggling as a result of like how they were born as civil rights movement, kind of the same thing, but they were doing something collectively to help each other continue onward while acknowledging their different experiences, finding a way to weave together in that. But something is different. If somebody wants to stay in a constant cycle of perpetual victimhood within this certain, just a watered down version of like what's considered to be this victimhood with no real solution, it just becomes an endless cycle. And they just
Yeah.
become disconnected on like what suffering really is and like what makes them human.
I think we're starting to make me think of here is that the general story of perpetual victimhood, regardless of the type or the particular ideology, maybe it could be even more personal in some people and not tied to an ideology, but it's has a lot in common with one of the core truths of that Buddhism suggests, and that is life is suffering, or that's maybe another way you could say it is that suffering is inevitable and it's natural and it's common. And but the victimhood story seems to take that and change it. Even to me, this is a big difference, but I think to some people it's actually subtle, and so they don't actually notice it that much. And the story of victimhood seems to take that notion of that suffering is inevitable and it's happens to you, to pretty much most people or everyone, and that implies perhaps that you're a victim of life itself. You're born, you didn't choose to be born, and now you're suffering. Life itself is a prison, you're trapped, you're miserable, now you're a victim of reality. And I don't think that's what Buddhism tries to imply most of the time. I think what that statement, suffering is inevitable, is more of an observation, and it's not a condemnation. It's not this pessimistic, miserable, woe is me, life is terrible, I'm trapped with no escape. But the victimhood mentality, I think there's this default ideal or this attachment to some kind of utopianism or this tendency to think maybe there's an escape somewhere I can find an escape out of this suffering or what feels like a prison to me, where life feels like a trap itself. I hate the way the world is. I feel miserable. I don't relate to it. And there's got to be something better out there. There's got to be a solution. And I think that tendency to grab for a solution is what continues people's suffering. It's the when they, one of my favorite philosophers on this topic is Eckhart Tolle, similar to Pema Chodron, and a lot of what he says comes down to your suffering is when you resist reality. If you're resisting what's happening here and now, all you're doing is denying what's here, and you're making yourself miserable.
You're
And
basically
that's
dying,
suffering.
yeah, denying basically what makes you human. Like you are going to be suffering, you're going to be experiencing this, but what can you make of it? You can accept it. Just be like, this is a part of what life is. You can adapt. You can do all sorts of different things with it. You can make it so you can work with this suffering. You can use it to improve yourself. You can use it to better relate to other people. We are all connected by this type of suffering. It's just it could be used rather as like instead of a barrier, it can be used as a tool. It's all what you make of it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm trying to figure some ways that we can essentially make lemonade out of lemons, um, with people in disempowered states, which a lot of us really experience some kind of disempowerment or barriers right now. Um, and just taking what's immediately around you and seeing, well, right now this seems like a barrier. It just seems like it's not that useful. But if I'm creative in a new way, maybe one man's trash could be another man's treasure. Maybe this thing that's not useful to me could actually be a tool for something. And I'm trying to figure that out through the lens of self-determination these days. But I find a lot of people I meet are not creative, or they're just not using their creativity. They're not very motivated. And it's an uphill battle.
I'm looking at the comments, and Ultra Picaro is making a point that I think is very related to what we've been talking about. He says, frankly, modern society elevates victimhood to a higher level in the continuous status game, so there's a social incentive to victimhood. When you're socially allowed to talk about more issues, if you can claim to be part of an oppressed tribe or identity, so victimhood is a type of social currency for the woke. Which also we're at the kind of the end of our hour, so if hang on, we have our afternoon sirens going. I'll come back in a second.
Uh-huh.
I was gonna say questions and comments, Nemos, if you want to do that
Yeah,
part.
yeah. Someone's probably calling 911 because of a microaggression. I don't know. Probably, probably not. It's probably real.
The
Hopefully, but
apartment building 2 blocks from us burned down last night too, so there could be there's constantly real stuff going on in this neighborhood.
wow, that's crazy. Well, I got a new idea, a project idea for Jeff. Maybe I'll hop over to Seattle and we can start the next Chaz in the place where the building burned down. But yeah, we're trying to do this thing where as we get more people involved in the podcast, that we make it a community socializing interactive thing. So if anybody wants to participate in this last 30 minutes, um, please hop in. You can comment things in the chat box. Otherwise, if anybody's around, you're welcome to actually call in or whatever. But otherwise, we'll just kind of riff on things. I don't know. Um, Dylan, you in the last like couple of years have just blown me away with what you've been discovering with empowerment and self-determination and getting to new levels of transcending the misery or suffering of life that happens sometimes. And um, I don't know, like thinking about when you were struggling in nursing school or some of the really tough times you've overcome. If there's somebody who's struggling with a sense of victimhood and they are looking for ways to empower themselves, what would you do for a person like that? Do you have any ideas that come to mind?
Listen to them is the biggest thing. And under like use of my understanding of like what going through nursing school is kind of like, or try to relate to someone like what they are going through, but ultimately like listening to them and trying to see where they're coming from.
And then
Get to
after
conversing
that,
with them. Yeah.
because I can do all that part, but there's still a point where there's solution or the problem solving or the moving them out of the victimhood to some kind of positive action.
Maybe making a few suggestions, be like, hey, like this is what I did, or maybe we can try a little bit something different like this, or let's see how we can use this to our advantage, or even how can we use this to understand people better, or how can we use this to do something else better? How can we see the world a little bit differently from this? Seeing what it has to teach us rather than having it pull us down.
Yeah. I'm
I don't
really
know.
getting curious about that when a person is on the edge where they're ready to or nearly ready to step out of their disempowered state, where they're not going to just keep reinforcing their misery because it's just not fulfilling them anymore. They find this is unsatisfying, whether it's an addiction, sense of victimhood, or something else. I'm trying to pay attention to those natural points when a person seems like they're ready for something And I think this is almost the mindset a person takes if they're going to do, say, an intervention. Um, and I think of a story from someone I was friends with for a couple of months, a couple of years ago. This is a very dramatic and very personal connection we had, and it was a whirlwind. This guy was addicted to meth, and I met him at an open mic, and me and another friend both knew him, and he was trying to quit and get himself in rehab, and he was a musician, and he was just like really passionate about becoming a musician, but it was either the music or the meth, and that was the constant tug of war. And at one point I let him use my recording equipment, and he recorded like an hour's worth of music and was going to edit it, and then he gave up, and he's like, this is not good, I don't like it, I'm disappointed. And he was just like completely at rock bottom. He stopped taking meth, so that also put him at rock bottom. He was like severely depressed, which is usually what happens if you just stop taking it. And I didn't even really try to do anything to solve a problem or help him or nothing. I was just like, "Oh, you record all this music. Let me listen to it." And I started playing it. And then he has a tendency to play music extremely loud, but when he did these recordings, it was more tame, simmered down. It was so personal, and it was actually really good. And I was just like, "Holy shit, this is really good." And as he heard it, he just like, I didn't do anything besides play the music and be impressed, and he was just like, "Oh my god, if I don't quit meth, it's going to ruin my music." And that was a realization he had all on his own.
Mhm.
So I think I was very lucky to discover that. So maybe
Yeah.
it's, to some extent, it's about like discovering what really motivates a person naturally. There's got to be something with most people, even if they're in a state of apathy. And if not, then I can't do anything for that person.
Yeah.
I don't know, Jeff. You seem
That's about as far as I've gotten. I haven't gotten
mm,
further than that. I can
really,
get them just about to the point that you described. But I think self motivation is part, like helping them find their own motivation. I can't give it to them. So I can take them there and help them spark or help nurture some kind of self motivation. But then there comes a point that they have to take it for themselves. Like they have to take over for themselves and take the actual next step. And that's the part where I get a lot of resistance.
yeah. Uh, I think people with our personality types, being naturally pro autonomy, anti authoritarian, me and Jeff, I think me and you might rub people the wrong way just based on the fact that we've never been in that state of embracing or enjoying victimhood. At least as far as I understand, we've never been in that place. And so I can tell sometimes, like from a conflict mediator perspective, that if I'm with somebody, it doesn't matter how much I empathize or use all the mediation tactics. They know that I'm choosing to do that and that I don't really personally relate. And they need somebody that can see eye to eye with that, which is tough to find because that means we need more people who are in that state of victimhood and were embracing it and even enjoyed it, who then realized it wasn't satisfying them on that deeper level, and then who overcame it. We need those people, and that's probably pretty rare to come by.
I met one this week. They seem to be at that point, and so I'm going to continue to explore that with them and see if I get any insight from it.
Yeah. We should get some people from CTA, Critical Therapy Antidote, on the show, and maybe do a deep dive on psychology, because it seems like we're stuck because we haven't figured out the psychology of this yet.
I would like to hear it from a social justice person or a victim. I would. I definitely like the chance to tap into their side of it from their own point of view.
Yeah.
So if there's anyone out there listening that wants to be on it or knows somebody from the social justice side that wants to come and let us kind of see it from their end,
Yeah.
send them our way. By the way, our email is jeffandnemo@gmail.com. If you want to email questions or comments or contact us throughout the week, you can reach us at that email.
I just put it in the messages.
Cool.
Well, Dylan, it was pretty cool that you came on the show. I really appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah, I've been trying to get Dylan to do a podcast with me for a while. It's the
Oh.
dream team.
Mhm.
Dylan, something else I noticed about you, besides the fact that you're pretty passionate and like self-motivated and discovering self-determination on that deeper level, is that you're very humorous. Dylan is like a walking meme machine. He knows
Oh, here we
memes that
go.
I don't know, and we're basically the same age, almost. So
Mhm.
it's like, I don't know, man. Would you say that you use humor or playfulness at all to kind of build relationships? Has that served you well?
Yes, it has. It's driven me to all sorts of locations. It's just amazing to see what it opens up.
Yeah. Do you feel comfortable telling, maybe generalized details if you want, but telling a bit of the story about the person you had a really good connection with at the laundromat?
Oh, yeah, so let's see. She was telling me, so every Friday I go over there to like do my laundry. There's this lady there who works there most Fridays, and she was telling me all about like what was going on, and then she went into going on about like how her mother died, and like screen a lot of the details that went into it. Like it was just a part of those other unknown things about life where you just don't really know what you're going to get yourself into. I mean, I came in to do laundry, and turns out to be like I had somebody open up to me so deeply as I was like just putting in all my dirty clothes and getting that stuff done. It was just a pretty amazing, not only for somebody to be open like that, but to also be trusted with such a thing like that. It's a pretty great honor when people are open with you. It's a pretty rare thing as well. That means like they really trust you, and it's a huge honor to have that. It's just amazing to hear that kind of stuff and what she was going through and what she wanted to do with life. It opened up a lot.
Yeah. When you first told me that story, it was awesome. And if we're kind of coming back to some of the themes of today, I have a hunch that close connection happened because both of you had an openness that allowed the connection to even happen. Like you were open to really listening, and you tend to give off an accepting and peaceful energy. And it sounds like she was open to sharing. And some people just don't share much about themselves. And so that it takes both people, it takes two to tango, two more open people, and maybe a little bit of courage to be vulnerable.
It's like kind of the aura that I get off. Like maybe it was more prominent ever since I became a nurse, considering like there are some of the most trusted people out there. I don't know. It's kind of interesting to see like who comes up to me and tells me all about stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of remarkable sometimes. And it's okay, so you know what you're reminding me of? One of my favorite philosophical leaders in kind of the culture wars, gender wars, however you want to characterize it, is Dr. Warren Farrell. He is potentially one of the most hated people by feminists, generally speaking. He was also in the 70s the only man ever elected to the board of the National Organization for Women. So he was a male feminist in the earlier eras, and he transitioned and evolved, and now he's for a long time been working on men's and boys issues. And feminists get so furious at him. But if you listen to the way he speaks and you see his body language and how vulnerable he is with these issues and how compassionate, he just seems like a freaking really friendly, grandfatherly, loving, caring figure. He does not come off as just hardcore and aggressive. And it just amazes me the dichotomy of people protesting outside his speeches, screaming their heads off about how horrible he is. And then you go inside and he's just, and we're here to empathize. Sometimes the wife is angry, sometimes the man, and he's just so peaceful about it. And it's like the disconnect is absurd.
I don't know. It's just like maybe that fear. Maybe it was that outside fear of the human experience. Maybe that fear of openness. Maybe those people don't think it's possible.
I think it's painful for a lot of people to reconcile things that seem like opposites. One of the reasons I think that Warren Farrell is so hated is that when people ask him if he's a feminist, these days he tends to say, if you mean in this context, blah, 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 of an older time period, a particular context, he'll say, yes, for those reasons, I'm a feminist. And he says, but because of this, this, and this, in this other context, I'm not a feminist. And that means he's essentially reconciling two opposing worlds. And I think a lot of people hate that because it makes it seem like he's trying to play for both teams, I guess.
Yeah, but isn't life made up of like self-sustaining paradoxes?
Say more, my friend.
I mean, you think about it, like there's life and death. Like one cannot exist without the other. Like for like to begin, death must occur. Or
Yeah.
War and peace must also work in tandem with each other to find out the motivations of what people have that brings people to a certain point.
Yeah. Uh, as Alan Watts said in his era, 60s, 70s, the police create the hippies as much as the hippies create the police.
Mhm.
It's a
Yeah.
psychological and philosophical phenomenon. I actually
I've
find that
noticed
with
that
social
too.
justice a lot too.
Yeah, I mean, during the same time there was a war, and there was also when Woodstock became a huge thing. Like those two things came together at
Yeah.
that time to create what makes up a lot of the modern era.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, as another example of those seeming paradoxes or opposing forces, the more that social justice becomes well known by outsiders that are not as aware, that used to not be aware of it, the more I'm seeing those people say things like, oh, those people are just not disciplined as kids. Those people are spoiled in childhood. They're probably just rich kids that never had to work hard. And it's like, based on my understanding as a youth mentor, without going on a rant here, and youth advocate, having come from an authoritarian household, seeing so many of my friends grow up in households kind of like that and then go turn into social justice warriors, I can tell those outsiders that the more they're authoritarian and they encourage a very authoritarian way of parenting towards kids is very controlling, the more they are creating that problem of social justice as we know it. That
I
may
think it
not
might
be
just
very
be the
obvious to some people, but it's a bit of a long story, anyways. Go
yeah,
ahead.
it might just be like the need for control. Like a lot of people might have that. Like they try to control things that are beyond what they can reach. It
Yeah.
might just be a way to like. It might just be a way to like cope with reality or to cope with suffering.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, and where there's control, there's a locus.
Aha. Yeah. Locus pocus.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know if Dylan knows about that concept, locus of control. Jeff and I have been talking about it quite a bit. Jeff, do you want to describe it from your perspective as a peer counselor at all? Or,
Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. It's whether you see yourself as at the mercy of external forces or whether you feel like some kind of agency over your own problems. And what I try to do is help people to live less in the former and to gain more of the latter. If you're faced with a problem, I focus on what can you do in this situation? What can you do to kind of take control of the situation or be part of the solution rather than be a victim at the mercy of some kind of external situation that you have no control over. And I think I don't know if it's always one or the other. It's probably somewhere around the middle. Like sometimes we are faced with things that are out of our control, but still there's some kind of something you can do, even if it's control of your own reaction to the situation or your own internal process in response to the situation. There's still some kind of inner footing you can gain that lets you feel more of a sense of mastery or self determination over something. And I find with social justice, it seems almost a complete external sense of locus of control, where everyone's at the mercy of these oppressive forces that they have to fight or dismantle or battle from the outside. And also, if they're faced with a microaggression or some kind of something that causes offense, they have to attack the source of that instead of managing their own reaction or seeing it in a certain context or gaining a different perspective on it, or I don't know, just being resilient and brushing it off too. So there's like responses that come from an inner sense of control over a situation. There's responses that come from the sense that you have to do something externally to manage the situation.
Yeah. You know what just occurred to me when you were saying that? Is that the people I've met who are like the main crusaders, they're not followers very much. They tend to be um, the leaders, the bossiest people, the loudest people in a lot of these contexts for social justice. Those people seem like they have an attachment to control, where the story of social justice may be very external locus of control. Everything's out of my power. There's all these oppressed groups, blah blah blah. But their attachment to that ideology and their attempt at position of power seems like that's where they put their internal control on. So the choices they're making that they're attached to are almost entirely connected to the ideology. And this is usually people that have been long entrenched in social justice. You don't get here overnight. The kind of long-term crusaders. And if I'm imagining, hypothesizing, if a person like that were to lose or give up the ideology and their whole environment, their communities, their friends, blah, 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 all of that, it effectively is like giving up almost everything they have control over. Like that's where they place their autonomy. They chose to invest in those types of decisions, being an activist, going out and protesting, getting a job that's social justicey, and crusading and canceling people, whatever it might be. If that's where they're putting all of their choices, if you suggest that might be toxic or not that meaningful, the idea of giving that up is like having nothing.
Well, it seems like they power keeps coming like they do it for power, a sense of power. It seems always power over somebody instead of power with somebody, and the locus of control or the social justice or the hook seems to be getting people to transfer their power to an external authority or to another person that's not themselves. And I'm still fascinated how that happens because I feel it very strongly when somebody's trying to convince me to transfer my power to them. I fight it and I resist it. But it seems like with social justice, they have a way of convincing people to transfer their sense of authority or power onto the social justice people instead of themselves. Like, trust us, you're racist. Trust us, we know what racism is. Transfer your sense of authority onto us so that we can guide you out of this. And that's very hard for me to do just in general. So I don't know how it's working as well. It's just working, but somehow people are being convinced to give up their internal power to other people that they elevate as a higher authority over their own self than they are.
Yeah, I think that's more exaggerated with people that are, say, naive or very agreeable that tend to become followers. I found that some of the people that did the most damage to me in some of my cases were not the loud, crusading, revolutionary people, which, I mean, they kind of started it, and that's what it looks like, but it was the people that were really quiet, that would never address or confront anything with social justice. There are people that seem to have been friends of mine because they're the ones that wouldn't come after me. And then when the shit hits the fan, the quiet ones just kind of go along with it and they turn into what you might call a useful tool. I don't mean to be derogatory, but I mean that's the inevitably what they become. If they're that submissive and if they're that
Yeah.
quiet, is those follower type people that I think make social justice possible. Otherwise, you just got a crusader on a soapbox that nobody's going along with.
And religion does the same thing, and social justice is constantly being compared to the religion. So some of the techniques and tactics they use are probably similar or are found in both realms.
Yeah. Yeah, Dylan, you grew up with religious in a religious context, right? Did you say that you find any similarities or
Yes, about like what's allowed and what's not allowed, like what's considered to be moral, what's considered to be immoral, like certain things that are forbidden, often for dumb reasons, because God said so.
yeah. Yeah, it seems very Puritan almost, like the social justice stuff we're seeing now, but um I wonder what would happen if I'm with a social justicey person and they say something that's like not allowed or a rule or whatever, and I just respond, "Why? Because God said so." Wonder how they'd react to that.
Let's get one on and find out.
Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, it's Ultra Picaro. Shout out. Um, they've been hanging out with us in the chat, and they said earlier that the problem finding is finding an SJW that can have a calm, reasonable conversation about it. And I guess yeah, we're looking for one if we can
Yeah,
find
I think it's
somebody.
possible. Maybe I'm being naive, but I have faith that there are social justice people out there that can have calm, rational conversations. So
Yes, I actually think I know a few people that would be willing to do it. Although, well, it's I know two people offhand that I think would be pretty good for that. But I don't know to what extent generally we're gonna have a hard time with some people not wanting to be public on our show because they don't want the bad publicity of being
we have
associated
no
with.
publicity. We have two viewers. There's no
Right now
publicity.
we don't, but I've already had people in Counterweight that said they didn't want to come on the show publicly because they're stealth right now. So I think there are legitimately people that are concerned about that, even
Mm.
and yeah, more concerned than I thought they would be. But
I, I see this as so harmless, but if they don't want to hang out with the bad boys, that's on them.
yeah, well, I think I understand it more because those are people. Oh, if there's a person that's actively in social justice environments, regardless of their beliefs, that they're trying to coexist and survive there, I can see it where they've invested so much. They put their eggs all in one basket, even if they didn't realize it. Like a lot of people from my old job network, to be associated with me in any way, to even talk to me privately, they would have to admit to themselves they're kind of trapped, that they are in a tangled mess, and they have to acknowledge now that if they were to stand up in any way, that they could lose their jobs and a bunch of their friends, their whole network, a sense of community, and just feel as if they're totally isolated. It kind of does feel like not just waking up from the matrix, but leaving it. It's not how I feel about it, but I think for people that have not known any different, if they build up that life, then it really feels like they're just giving up everything.
Well, I would say to those people that there is a community that's forming, and it's becoming a pretty large community. So that you won't be alone. There is life and people outside of what you may think that you're trapped in.
Yeah. The best communities I've had, and I kind of feel this about, say, like me and Dylan and some of our friends, the people we really hang around. I describe it as if it's like the island of misfit toys from the Rudolph claymation. Like those are my favorite spots where, especially for me being kind of an outsider a lot of the time, I always tell people I feel like I'm outside of the loop. Whatever the loop is, I'm never in one. I got to create my own loop
Yeah, same
and
here. I've,
party with the outcasts.
yep, that's my friends have always been drawn from that crowd. The outcasts, the misfits, the friends, the people nobody else wants to be friends with, kind of find their way to me somehow. So
Yeah.
I relate.
Me and Dylan met that way back in junior high. I didn't know him as well in junior high. We sort of reconnected as adults, but I don't know, Dylan. You remember the days of junior high drama club?
Yeah, I do. I remember some of those.
And we were sort of like the outcast club, sort of. I mean, the weird kids club, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah, in a
totally.
sense.
Well, Dylan, I'm glad you came on today
Yeah.
and were able to join us. Do you have anything you want to wrap up with or
Anything
Yeah.
inspirational?
close?
I don't know. Just stay compassionate, stay open.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
All right. It's good seeing you all.
You two come back anytime, and
All right.
we're here every Saturday.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yep. Yeah, Dylan, if you ever want to do community building besides this podcast, me and Jeff are starting to get pretty active.
We have Discords you can join. We have Zooms you can
Mhm.
drop in on and hang out.
Yeah.
So just contact us and let us know.
Yeah,
Cool.
That
just
goes
whenever.
for the audience too.
Yeah.
Yep, all
All
our
right.
links are in the descriptions as per usual. Our contact email, jeffandnemo@gmail.com, and appreciate everybody for being here today.
Yep, and
Yeah.
we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening in all. Bye.
Take
Yeah.
care.
Okay.
Nemo.